My journey as a mystic. Welcome. Well, we're now well into Ramadan. In fact, by the time many of you hear this, it'll be Eid. So I should wish you Eid Mubarak, or Salamat Hari Raya, Eid al-Fitri. And now, Ramadan is a time when I cleanse myself, when I abandon my daily routine. So I don't do tarot readings, and indeed I don't create content. So yes, this was actually recorded prior to Ramadan. It's a time when I spend as much time as I can focusing on Allah and focusing on my beliefs as a Muslim. It's a time for prayer. In fact, I don't even meditate during Ramadan. It's a time after which I emerged changed. If you like, you could see it as a reset. So this is really the perfect opportunity to describe my own mystical journey. The ancients. Although I did have many paranormal experiences as a child. There were many things I did. Travelling through time and space. Nothing dramatic. Travelling outside my body. Seeing strange things. But of course, when I went to school and then university, these things were suppressed. I no longer believed in them, so I could no longer do them. Now, I did study history, but not ancient history, I should add. Sociology and some psychology. But really, I suppose I'm a logical material, or I was a logical materialist. Some might even say a scientist, certainly a social scientist. And I taught materialism, if you like, at a major international business school. So when my wife talked of being attacked by black magic, I wanted to help. I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what. And, maybe it would have been better if I'd stuck to science. Because in sort of trying to understand her, I probably fed some of her paranoia. Nevertheless, as an empath, I needed to understand her. I needed to understand what was happening in my attempt to help her. So I started off by looking at magic. But I couldn't find any sort of real linking traditions within magic which would take me much further. I now understand that, even the Western tradition as ceremonial magic, and that is split into many bits, such as the Golden Dawn, and there's also chaos magic. There's many different parts, so maybe that's why I couldn't find this sort of real body of knowledge I was looking for. I did find in this magic, I suppose you could call it ceremony, that's perhaps a bit strong, but some things that I could do for protection. And I concluded they weren't working. Maybe they were working, but certainly things for my wife and later myself and my youngest daughter kept getting worse and worse until we all nearly died and my wife did lose her mind. I started to see ghosts. Really, I started to see ghosts. Now, I did used to as a child, but, this is the first time I can remember as an adult seeing ghosts. As a result of this, I started looking at people who'd had near-death experiences and trying to understand, I suppose, the nature of life. Because only if I could understand the nature of life could I understand the nature of death. And this really was the beginning of the mystical journey. Now, what I would say to you is that my knowledge of ghosts seem to be downloaded almost in a flash. In a flash is putting it too strongly. But I seem to have these downloads that occurred instantaneously. And certainly the major downloads were spread over the course of just a couple of days. They just came to me. I wasn't aware of any reading or any influence apart from having seen the ghosts of where they came from. Round about that same time, I was very taken by Graham Hancock. Those of you who've not listened to Graham Hancock, you really must, because he's wonderful. And he looks at ancient civilizations. And this threw up some very important questions. First of all, it led me to question the inevitability of progress, which is implied in the Enlightenment, i.e. that the idea that the man is getting constantly more knowledgeable, more understanding and sophisticated, if you like. But it also led me to question, as indeed Graham does very strongly now, our understanding of history. Because of whilst I can understand an attack on an Enlightenment science, it seems to me that history is above that. But clearly it's not. Clearly it's not. And the suggestion from Graham Hancock and looking at Graham Hancock was that ancient, maybe prehistory man understood more than us. Now, Graham is quite a fan of Hermes Trismegistus, and so it led me to look into Hermes Trismegistus, a Greek god. Oh, that's his Greek name. In Egyptian, his name is Thoth. And so, yeah, it's a Greco-Egyptian collection of ideas, if you like. They claim he's a god. Well, he was venerated as a god. And he wrote something called the Emerald Tablet, which contains the Philosopher's Stone. Much has been written in the name of Hermes Trismegistus. And probably not him. Indeed, he may not even have existed. Simply a convenient pen name for a series of spiritual beliefs. But he was at the centre. Well, it's believed that he taught them in the mystery schools, but certainly the mystery schools imparted the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus. And he continues to have a massive impact today. The Freemasons, in particular, think very highly of Hermes Trismegistus. And much of the New Age thinking can be traced back to Hermes Trismegistus, so to these mystery schools. There is debate as to whether the Emerald Tablets was actually written by him and may have been written within the Islamic world. Certainly, he's believed to be the prophet Idris in Islam. And I suppose it was looking at this that I started looking at gematria, something I practiced in a sort of very simplistic way as a child. But it was based on a belief that there was a code to the universe. That if God had created the universe, he'd created it around a code. And if only I could crack this code, maybe I could help my wife. Maybe if I could crack this code of how God had created the universe, there was something there that would explain not only what was happening, but I could intervene and help. In parallel with this, I was looking at science and linking it up to science, particularly quantum theory. And also I was looking at the philosophy of science and the science of consciousness. A diversion in all this was the Kybalion, a study of the Hermetic philosophy of ancient Egypt and Greece, which is purported to have originated with Hermes Trismegistus, although it was actually William Walker Atkinson, who I've spoken about before, but let's leave it at saying that he was somewhat notorious. Now, if you've not already read the Kybalion, I do urge you to, because it's a brilliant explanation of New Thought, or the New Age, something I'd never looked at before. I suppose the phrase that most people will know from it is "as above, so below." Now, I have to say that having recommended it to you, it's very trendy for magicians now to be highly critical of the Kybalion. Why? Well, I think the reason is that they, like me, they spent an awful long time studying it, believing that it held some sort of key to the universe, and realised that ultimately it revealed nothing. Nevertheless, I'm not saying don't read it, because I think it is an essential building block to your understanding of many of the things that I talk about, even though you will ultimately find it wanting. Religion. Well, I think I've told you before that I was born into a Christian family, although of Jewish heritage. And although I became agnostic, I did return to the church as a teenager, only to embrace agnosticism later again. As a young man, I lived and worked in Saudi Arabia. I later lived in Bradford in England, the English city with the largest Muslim majority, and then in an area of Manchester with a significant, well, very significant Muslim population. So I've always been close to Muslims, I've always been close to Islam, but I have been agnostic for most of my life. So when I really had to convert to Islam in order to marry my wife, which I actually did, married twice, and therefore also converted twice, I was already well disposed to it. Maybe I didn't take it that seriously, and maybe that's why I embraced it, because I didn't take it seriously. And of course, the reason why all this may have happened to me is black magic and, all the misfortune. That may be the reason that these were all tests. Many people speak of when they find religion being tested. So maybe it was my test, I don't know. So although I was exploring magic, mysticism, etc., at the same time I became a serious Muslim. I started to pray 5 times a day, even 5 times a day at the masjid, or mosque as you might call it. Why? Why did I feel the need to do that? Well, I felt with all that I was looking at, it provided me with some structure, it provided me with some grounding. It provided me with something that I could hold on to test my beliefs, to test what I was thinking, maybe to stop me from going completely mad. I suppose, and probably the reason why I would still be a very devout Muslim is, at the end of the day, I feel you have to believe in something. And, that seems as good a reason as any. So slowly I began to gain knowledge of Kejawen because, my wife had been inducted into Kejawen. What seemed to be happening to her seemed to be linked to Kejawen. Certainly her experience of this black magic, there seemed to be a Kejawen base to it. And indeed there was. We visited many Dukan and Paustads. So Islam and magic went hand in hand. There was no serious division as one maybe finds in the West. And much later I sort of discovered Kejawen and Sufi mysticism. And this seemed to explain to me much more than the New Age that I flirted. Well, yes, no, I had flirted with. Much more than the Western magic tradition, and much more than quantum theory. Although if you put them all together, maybe they are very close to Kejawen and Sufi mysticism. But as I say, I always had and clung on to Islam to keep me grounded. Narcissism. More recently, I've been exploring narcissism. Partially, I've found succor in it because it helps to explain to me why people have used black magic in attempts to kill me and my family. Something I've really, really struggled with. But in looking at narcissism, I came to the realisation that my own mother is something of a covert narcissist. And that in itself explains many of the choices that I've made in my life. Or going back to my original sort of comments, I suppose that what I was searching for was why me? But the real major impact was that a partner that I was with for some 20 years was a covert narcissist and psychopath. And yet, she came incredibly close to destroying me. Incredibly close to destroying me. Before I moved to Indonesia, I was developing an alcohol problem, something that her previous husband had done. But most importantly, I think when you live with a narcissist for any length of time, and me 20 years is extreme, it leads you to questioning reality. And therefore you're open to paranormal experience. Now you might say that's just stress, but I don't think it is. I think it's there's gaslighting, there's all sorts of things. But the gradual withering away or whittling away of your own certainty, of your own self, is what really seems to does it. So were these also related to black magic attacks? Probably. I mean, magic, it seems to me, is just a term that we use for what we cannot explain. Sometimes people call magic something which science is yet to explain, but I suspect it's something science never will explain. But I think we're wrong to atomise magic from our other experiences, and therefore also from scientific explanations. So just as magic went side by side with religion, I think it does run parallel with science, does run parallel with the material world. And to atomise it and see it as something completely separate is just applying the sort of Enlightenment logic to it. Now I have to warn you, narcissism, I mean, you only have to look at YouTube. Narcissism has become an industry in itself. And as soon as you start getting into it, you see everybody as a narcissist. As soon as you start getting into it, we all believe that our own mothers were narcissists. It's a trap that we all just fall into, but I do believe mine was, or is. This leads us to taking on a victim mentality, which is very destructive. But worse, we sort of define ourselves as victims, but as empaths, which indeed I do, and therefore superior to narcissists. But But this is our ego coming back. This is the ego reasserting itself, and something we must guard from. Nevertheless, I've developed this theory which sees that narcissists are sent to Earth to live in their own hell. Because they have no emotions of their own. They're fearful of everybody and everything. Isn't that hell? But I believe that what narcissists are really doing is to make everybody think like narcissists, to make the whole world behave as though it's narcissistic, to make all of the assumptions we have about the world the assumptions of the narcissist. However, like all concepts in mysticism, there's a danger of exploring this without love. So mysticism without love is a very, very dangerous thing. Of course, mysticism emphasises love, but that's why. Of course, if we do have mysticism without love, bit of a tautology, you could argue it's not mysticism at all, because what we are doing is simply reinforcing the ego. Kejawen. Well, of course, I was exploring Kejawen mysticism, and in doing so, exploring its antecedents in animism, Hinduism and Buddhism. You've probably heard me, I've been somewhat dismissive of the influence of theosophy, really the beginning of the New Age, as it seemed to me that it had the same antecedents as Kejawen, rather than being an antecedent of Kejawen. Maybe this simply reflects my distrust of the New Age, which I will talk about later. I'm also somewhat dismissive of the influence of Sufi mysticism on Kejawen, because like the New Age, it has similar antecedents. But I'm not at all mistrustful of Sufi mysticism. No, I've embraced that along with Kejawen mysticism. Indeed, I see the higher levels of Kejawen as really being a form of Sufi mysticism. But I've a hunch, and I might be wrong, that they were arrived at largely independently. And of course, we find similar things to Kejawen mysticism within Hinduism, Buddhism, Neo-Platonism, Platonism, the Kabbalah, Christian mysticism, the New Age. All have goals of a oneness of God, the method being to suppress the ego. How do we do it? Well, first of all, by eroding the assumptions of the Enlightenment and Enlightenment materialism. So to slowly erode our view of reality as governed by the scientific method. And secondly, to be guided by love. To be guided by, firstly, meditation, and then when we found love, to be guided by love. So like my search to unlock the code for the universe, love seems to be the core to mysticism. And, you know, the love that I speak of is the light that I found, the light of love and bliss. And once we found that, the actual religious path doesn't seem to matter at all. It's the light we follow rather than a religion. And once we found the light, really nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. Certainly not one's religious path. Contextualism and constructivism. Well, you've heard me argue before that we co-create our reality with God through our beliefs. Also, I've talked about the difficulty in escaping the materialist paradigm due to the hegemony of those in power. Therefore, unlike many New Agers, and hence my distrust of them, I do refer to my sources. Not in an academic way, but I could do. But I do try to point you in the direction of where I've been influenced so that you can follow it up. But I think the bigger reason is the New Age is inherently conservative. So although we see mysticism as sort of attacking authority, attacking the status quo, the New Age has stripped it of that, and it's inherently conservative, and it supports rather than questions greed. So it really supports existing power structures rather than attacks or questions. It seems to me that despite all of the New Age's talk of love, that it is mysticism without love. Now, you know, there's some people from the New Age that I like immensely, and I don't want you to think I'm attacking everybody. But too much of it sort of deteriorates into get-rich-quick type of schemes. And, you know, as I say, they don't quote their sources. Now, it would be valid if they simply said, well, I came upon this through meditation. It would be valid, but often I believe there are sources that they're just simply not referring to. And more than that, the claims that they make, they claim to them as though they're universal truths, that they're undisputable. So when you don't have the sources and you don't know where they're coming from, it's very hard for you to sort of validate what they're saying. Now, not only do I sort of push you towards my sources, but I also talk about my background and my experience and how these have shaped my views, because that's important for you to know. What about if my mysticism is simply a product of my background and my experience? And why wouldn't it be? Because I've talked about hegemony. Indeed, this is what Katz argues in his critique of mysticism. Can experiences ever be independent of what shapes my consciousness? And of course I interpret my experiences, but am I interpret them from a truly ecumenical, from a truly non-judgmental standpoint? I don't think I could. I try to, but surely that's impossible. So am I papering over the differences with Buddhists, Hindus and New Agers? Well, I don't think I am, because of wherever there are differences or major differences, I do talk about them. But certainly I prefer to focus on similarities and not differences. The epistemology, it's the epistemology of the experience, but the epistemology of the interpretation of the experience that is all important. So I suppose you could say, am I engaged in a form of colonialism in my embracing Kejawen? And some of you might be agreeing. Certainly what I can tell you is, on YouTube, I often get comments. I'm not sure if they're Arab, well, some I know are Indonesian. I'm not sure if they're Arab or Indonesian. Could be both, I think. Who do accuse me of this sort of colonialism. But so far, all they've done is said, you're a foreigner. So they've not been the most intellectual of arguments, you know. Am I fooling myself? And if I am fooling myself, am I in turn fooling you? Maybe. Maybe that's exactly what I'm doing. I can only take on board these thoughts. I can only continue on my path. Or as William James put it, this mysticism would seem to be an antidote to today's materialism. So all I am left with is embracing unity and, indeed, difference. I really hope you've enjoyed this vlog and that, not only got something out of it, but provoked thoughts. I'm not here to push my beliefs, my thoughts on you, only to open up your own thinking, get you thinking about the world and life. When I started The Real Magic of Java, I believed that I'd only release them every month or maybe every 2 months. But now I find myself adding to this subsection once or twice a week. But please subscribe and hit the bell to get notifications for when I add new parts to this subsection. In part, the reason why I'm doing it more often is that the concept has moved from filming rituals and events that took place in Java to me also describing my beliefs and philosophy. And that does come in response to people expressing an interest in it. But of course, me actually seeing rituals and events really doesn't happen so often. What I would say to you is that there's no attempt at subterfuge on my behalf. And when I do experience rituals, I will include them for you to see. And as I say, there's no way I'm trying to mislead you. And if I believe there is subterfuge, if I uncover it, I will point it out to you. I'm trying to be as honest as I can be. Now, please make comments, please ask questions, and I'll try to be as honest and open with you as I can be. Of course, there will be some of you who disagree with me, particularly when I talk in terms of my own beliefs, my own feelings. And, you're welcome to alternative feelings, and we can agree to disagree. Sometimes I find that people on YouTube can be unnecessarily attacking and aggressive, and at times I don't restrain myself enough, and I apologise, but it's not my intention to put anybody down, I know what I talk about can be emotive, and it can be challenging to your beliefs. But, I'd love to enter an open discussion, a heartfelt discussion. But unfortunately, I often come across things that are, especially when people quote the scriptures to me, I've just no idea where it takes us, Because I'm speaking from the heart, sorry, if you want to quote the scriptures at me, do so, but it doesn't have much impact on me, I personally have no desire to impose my feelings on you, and I suppose when people try to do it to me, it washes off, All I'm trying to do is I'm trying to share my feelings with you, and I'd love an open discussion on feelings. I really would love it, and sorry if I don't always react as best I should. I try and cure this in myself, but I think this is part of the sort of narcissism of social media that I talk about so much in this subsection. So look, if you've enjoyed it, I really urge you to listen to other sections on this channel, particularly the 4 audio books that I've uploaded onto this channel. Yes, they are in a novel format. They are novels, but they go into much greater depth than my thoughts and feelings. Now, what I would say to you is these are sequential. So my thoughts and feelings develop as we go through each chapter and each book. So it does begin with 1.1, the Chinese cemetery. But, hey, it's up to you. Feel free to dip in as you wish, as you want. And, really heartfelt thanks for listening to this. And I really want to say a great big thank you, and God bless you.